This is A Different Perspective with Kevin Randle. A retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel, Kevin Randle has been studying UFOs for nearly 50 years. Kevin has investigated some of the most famous UFO cases in the world and has been consulted for dozens of documentaries about UFOs. Considered one of the leading experts into the Roswell UFO Crash of 1947, Kevin has written more than 25 books about UFOs, including the recently published Roswell in the 21st Century. Now, here is the host of A Different Perspective, Kevin Randle.
And welcome to this edition of A Different Perspective. I'm Kevin Randle. As I promised last week, I will be joined by Don Schmitt. And we've been talking about some of the older cases in UFOs, some of the way the UFO investigations have gone, and some of the stuff that's come out recently, such as the discussion of the UAPs and that report from the Sun last week that talked about the 1,574 documents they had received in their FOIA request from to the government about the documents and how that really didn't provide us with much additional information. Don, welcome back to A Different Perspective after a week off.
Is it already a week? My God. Well, it's great to be back with you, Kevin. Thank you.
I think we kind of exhausted MJ-12. We have exhausted abductions. We've talked a little bit about Roswell. But before we leave Roswell, let's just do one more thing, and that's Glenn Dennis. Glenn Dennis, of course, was the mortician who talked about his nurse pal who was involved in a preliminary autopsy of the alien bodies at the base hospital in Roswell and that sort of thing. I think I abandoned him much earlier than you did. I believe you've abandoned that testimony at this point. What is your opinion of Glenn Dennis?
Well, and in saying abandon him specifically in his recounting his run-in or his experience at the base hospital with the nurse with the phony name he had provided us, Naomi Self. And it was mainly for the fact that he gave us the false name. Now, I had confronted Glenn. I think the reason I wasn't as quick to dismiss Glenn was because I was still in contact with him face to face. I was the one, and Tom Carey was with me at the time when I confronted him and accused him of providing us the wrong name, and then actually suggesting to him that he was having an affair with this nurse at the time. And that's what he was covering up. The fact that his first wife was still alive at that time, his second wife, Kay, was still there, and Tom was witness to his blowing up at me. And how dare you accuse me of that? Well, I accuse you of that because that's what I'm convinced was happening. And he finally pretty much admitted that he was covering up for the fact that, he was cheating on his wife at that time. And back then, that was a much bigger, scandal than today by today's standards. So it wasn't accepting as an excuse as much as he had acknowledged that was the case.
Well, then the question becomes why? We're talking to him in the early 1990s. His marriage to his first wife is over. It's divorced. He's now married to Kay. What would possess him to come up with this cockamamie story to cover up an affair that had no effect on her or us or anything else?
Well, I think the Air Force at least provided a nurse in the guise of Adeline Fatton, who was a member of the M Squad at the base hospital on 47th. And that, as Glenn had described Naomi as looking like a young Audrey Hepburn, black hair, big black eyes, and someone who had considered going into the sisterhood within the Catholic Church prior to going into the Army Nurse Corps. And she matched that, description, and that she too had been transferred to England within a few weeks after the incident. So was that a coincidence, or was that the nurse that Glenn was having this affair with? And then that the Air Force also determined that she died a few years thereafter of a childhood disease, not the plane crash that Glenn claimed or that Glenn said he was told, that type of thing. But there is someone, I mean, there is a nurse that at least matches that MO in that regard. Because again, it comes back to, why did Glenn lie about her? Why did he not just tell us that she was the nurse?
But the point really is, she wasn't involved in an autopsy there at the base.
No, not that we're aware of. And
that's the real point. There's no, in the 1990s, there's no reason to even bring this up.
No.
Unless he has some ulterior motive to doing that. Talking about having seen not seen the bodies, but talked to the nurse who'd seen the bodies, and that the nurse who was telling him all about the crash and what had happened. There's no motivation for him to create this cover story for an affair that ended decades earlier and had no effect on the situation in the 1990s. It just makes no sense at all that he would.
And it always bothered us, this claim that he was able to just drive right onto the base and drive right out to the base hospital at the time that this was all going down. And that he recalled too, when we first took him out to where the hospital had originally been located, and the rehab center that now is gone, but at that time was built to the west of where the base hospital originally was. And he was trying to convince us that the loading dock area at that new building was the original from the base hospital, when it wasn't. So he was even steering us wrong regarding even the building itself, demonstrating that for you to claim that you walked in through those back doors of that ER examination room, when you couldn't even tell us the correct location when you took us there many years thereafter. Again, painted this impression that he was just steering us along when we came to that portion of the story about actually encountering the nurse at the hospital, and then a day or two later meeting with her at the PX and her drawing a sketch of this preliminary autopsy.
Here's another problem. Where did we get the name Glenn Dennis? We got it from Walter Hott.
Right.
And you remember standing outside that bank building where they had the first museum up on the 7th or 8th floor or whatever it was, across the street from what used to be the Greyhound bus depot.
Bus depot, correct.
And I asked Walter about Glenn Dennis, and he said, everything he tells you is golden. You can believe it.
Mm-hmm.
Walter had to know the story wasn't true.
But the story originally that I recall came to us through Bob Shirkey, that Shirkey was the one who Glenn supposedly first confided to. And then it came to us, and actually Shirkey had also approached Stan Friedman about, you remember, Stan got to Glenn before we did.
No, he didn't.
Well, I know, but they had a sit down where they actually talked to one another.
Yes, but I talked to Glenn Dennis before Stan Friedman got involved in it, and I had an appointment with Glenn Dennis. It would have been I think 4 or 5 days after Stan had sat down with him.
And then we sat down, and then we actually got him on tape with Mark Wolf, the late Mark Wolf.
Yes.
November of 1990 with the documentary, first Roswell documentary.
But here's the point. Walter Hott had to know Glenn Dennis wasn't telling the truth. We got the name from Walter Hott, not from Shirkey. Because remember, we're sitting in Walter Hott's living room talking about this, and Walter says to us, I know the name you're fishing for, it's Glenn Dennis. I got the idea there was a mortician involved from Cliff Stone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Correct.
So I had been looking for the mortician, and Walter Hott gave us the name. But so the question becomes at this point is why would Walter Hott support Glenn Dennis's story because Walter Hott had to know it wasn't true?
Or if in retrospect, we would now have the chance, we would ask Walter, were you aware of the story? Were you aware of the story that he would then provide us at the time that you told us about Glenn? See, I guess we don't know that Walter knew anything more than Glenn had worked for the Ballard Funeral Home at the time of the incident. As to the extent of his involvement, was that news to us as well as to Walter at the time? I guess we won't know.
Well, remember, Walter told us that he and Glenn Dennis had shared an office at one point. His art gallery was in one part of the building, and Glenn Dennis's office was in another part of the building. So they knew each other for many, many years.
Correct. Right.
So I'm just bothered by Walter Hott endorsing Glenn Dennis's tale, which we now know is not true.
No, or supporting a friend. We don't know.
Well, yeah. Okay. We can go there, I suppose. I think we should move into some of the modern problems with ufology. And one of those is Trinity. This is Jacques Vallée's book. I had Jacques Vallée on the program. I talked to him extensively about it. The book, I read the book. It was horrible. I had to really struggle through it. A lot of nonsense in there that had no relevance to the initial story. We're going to have to take a break here in a moment, so I'm going to set this up for the next segment. One of the main witnesses is a fellow you talked to in the 1990s.
Remy Baca.
Yes, absolutely. Before Paulo Harris and Jacques Vallée got a hold of him and chatted with him and that sort of thing. So you had the story earlier. I think Stan may have had it even earlier than that.
He may have. It was around that same time, right?
So we've got this story, Trinity. So we're going to talk to it from a position of having some personal firsthand knowledge about that story and some of the other information that came out in the discussion with Baca and that sort of thing, and what Jacques Vallée had said. Once again, the blog is www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com, and I say this only because it is an opportunity for me to provide a little bit of additional information for somebody who's interested in that additional information about the things that we talk about on the program here. So Don and I will be back right after this, and we'll be talking about Trinity. So please stick around.
So I was watching the X Zone TV channel last night when I was abducted by aliens, and they kept repeating to me over and over again, simultv.com, simultv.com.
What's simultv.com?
That's what I asked them. They had it written on the side of their UFO.
How do you spell that?
UFO.
No, I mean simultv.com.
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 Right. simultv.com.
Interesting that you were abducted by aliens in a simultv.com UFO last night.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Now that you mention it, I remember now last night I was awakened from a deep sleep. My great-grandmother was standing there. She said she'd come from the hereafter to tell me about simultv.com. She even spelled it out for me.
simultv.com, sonny boy.
simultv.com.
simultv.com, sonny boy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Guys, you'll never guess what my psychic guru just told me.
simultv.com.
Exactly. Are you guys psychic too?
Of course.
We all know about simultv.com. simultv.com.
And we are back. I'm joined by Don Schmitt. We've been talking about a lot of things in the world of ufology. From the last program last week, we talked about UAPs and the government reopening investigations, which are going to be classified immediately, apparently, from what they've said. We've talked about some of the history of UFOs. We talked about some of the problems with the Roswell case and abductions and things like that. When we went away here, I had mentioned Trinity, which is the book that Jacques Vallée and Paola Harris had published last June. I guess it came out last June, talking about a UFO crash near San Antonio, New Mexico, which if you're driving from Roswell to Socorro, you probably have gone through San Antonio, New Mexico. It's a little small town. Two young boys who were 7 and 9, I think it was at the time, 1945, came across the crashed UFO and explored it and studied it and did all kinds of things like that. This is a story that Remy Baca has been pushing for literally, I guess, decades. And I mentioned before we went away, and Don kind of confirmed this, that he had talked to Remy Baca in the late 1990s about this. Tell us a little bit about your encounter with Remy Baca.
I had just given a presentation in Ventura, California, just north of LA. And I was introduced to, and I heard it as Ray Baca at that time. And he had me sign a copy of a Roswell book. He had just heard the whole lecture as far as on Roswell. And he described that he was present on the plains in 1947, trying to draw that connection, that he was a potential witness. And because already we were discounting anything happening on the plains, especially in July of 1947, it remained in my gray basket for all those years until he resurfaced about 10 years later and was claiming that he had an actual artifact, something from the crash. And the good partner that I am, I referred him immediately to Tom Carey. I felt I, didn't want anything further to do with this because, he was making claims that I felt could not be justified, couldn't be verified. And so Tom would engage him, and he would send Tom pictures of this artifact, which we both looked at and we're going, where have we seen this before? This looks familiar. And finally, I came up with the notion that this was something that looked like it was part of a windmill. As it turns out, it was. It was the internal rotor shaft of a rudder blade from a windmill that we so often would see in New Mexico. Well, again, it fell to the wayside. Nothing became of it. And then all of a sudden, next thing we know, Paula Harris is promoting this case. And not that it happened on the plains, but that it happened. And as we both know, there are many areas of New Mexico that are called the plains, whether it be a local rancher, referring to a particular pasture or area on their own ranch, or certain areas of New Mexico itself. And that it happened in San Antonio, San Antonio, New Mexico, and that it happened not in 1947, but rather in 1945, 2 years before. And then to hear the military's involvement, and then for the book to come out, Trinity, by Valet and Harris. And I think, like yourself, what bothered me most about the case was not only the change of the date, location, but the behavior of the military, that it was that nonchalant, that it was that lacking in security, that they were, and then the idea that they were destroying the wreckage, that they were burning it, they were burying it, they were acting like this was something routine, and that they left even unattended vehicles and would return the next day to resume the recovery, the retrieval operation, that type of thing. So none of it painted, genuine in that regard. And yet there were all these trappings, all these overlappings about Roswell. And as I had mentioned, we had met after I'd given a Roswell lecture.
Let me interrupt here, because there's one point you said just a moment ago, all these trappings of Roswell. And I know what you meant by that. It means that a lot of the descriptions he was giving were things that came out of the Roswell case. It sounded exactly like it had been lifted from the Roswell case, which is suggestive of something that isn't accurate and isn't true.
Right. Exactly. And so thank you for that. And just, it was a case that, as a result, was quickly dismissed because there was nothing that smacked of reality, nothing that smacked of even the terrain, New Mexico, as we both know it. There was nothing that suggested an actual military recovery operation, as you, especially in your case, Kevin, you would anticipate, as you would expect. So it's like, what does it take to finally dismiss this as being just so much fantasy? And as we have Remy Baca, as Tom recorded him in one of their phone conversations, actually asking him How can I make money off of this? And that in itself, to me, should be the kiss of death. End of story. Because you're clearly demonstrating that this is all this is to you. How can I make money off of my story, per se?
Well, is it single witness? I mean, there were two young boys involved in it. There was another fellow who was with Remy Baca. Did anybody interview him about what he had seen and what he had done?
No, not as far as any investigation. I'm sure, I mean, they would claim that their fathers were involved. They would claim that they even, in retrieving some of the wreckage, that they hung pieces from their Christmas tree, years thereafter. And again, there should be a whole train of witnesses within the families alone. And you read the book. Where was this effort to talk? I mean, you and I, again, we walked the walk. We tracked down and we went to the very homes of every potential witness we could. I don't see that here, that you would rely on one lone individual to tell you the whole story, and you're able to write a whole book about it.
Well, I think the important point is that kind of like the Gerald Anderson story that we were talking about before, all the relevant witnesses were already dead before they began talking about it. So you couldn't go to the witnesses and say, the family, and say, is this true? Did this happen? What were we doing here? I want to point out, because I think it's important, that the stuff they hung from the Christmas tree was sort of like tinsel. Mm-hmm. It was sparkly ribbons of metal that they hung from the Christmas tree. And so the question then becomes, if you had all this material, where is it now?
Where is it now?
Somehow it always disappears. And that's kind of the problem with the Roswell case too. Every time we've heard that, somebody has a piece of debris, or somebody has done this, or somebody's done that, we can never get to the point where we've got that piece of evidence. It always seems to vanish. It's a friend of a friend type story.
Well, you remember the case with Walt Whitmore Jr., the son of the majority owner of the radio station KGFL, and that he had a piece from, that Brazel, the ranch foreman, had actually brought into town that Sunday, July 6th. And he kept this piece in that bank security box for like 30 years. And then he returned home with it. He died after we had met with him shortly thereafter.
Well, let me clarify that one point. He made a big deal about how he had kept it in a safe deposit box for years and years and years.
Right.
But then he was going to take a trip to Europe, and he had to put something else into the safety deposit box. So he took that debris out and he took it home with him. Mm-hmm. And then it put it in his junk room, as he called it.
Correct.
So my question is, you've got something that you thought was of historical significance, maybe of great value, that you kept in a safe deposit box for years and years and years. And then suddenly you decided, well, it's not as important as some other stuff. I'll just take it home and throw it into my junk room.
And for all of the efforts by our parents and by the late Max Littell, who had introduced us to Whitmore Jr., again, conveniently disappears. Gone.
Or his discussions with the late Carl Flock.
Right.
But this sort of relates to the Trinity case, because we have the same situation there. Here's this debris that they've collected from this UFO crash, and they've spread it amongst the family members, and they've kept it for years and years and years. And suddenly when we show up to investigate, we end up with absolutely nothing.
But not to diminish the comparison to Roswell in this context, because Roswell, as an historic event, it's documented. There was a press release. The personnel who were involved, the military base who was involved in the recovery operation. Whereas the case with Trinity, there is no such documentation. There is no such press release. There are no such witnesses. There are no military witnesses that we're aware of at all. And the fact that the date was changed, at least in my case, where I was originally told it was 1947, and now it becomes 1945. So that's where the comparison ends. that in some of the disappearance of the alleged wreckage, yes, but aside from that, there is no comparison. It's night and day.
Well, the question becomes, I mean, Jacques Vallée is a well-known scientist, respected in the UFO community for a lot of the work that he has done. What would possess him to get involved in something that is this tenuous?
Well, in an article I did last year in reference to the book, in regards to the book, and I cited the case of J. Allen Hynek, and working with him in the last number of years of his life, he would often lament, "I'm an old man in a hurry. I'm an old man in a hurry." And I think it's one of the reasons that Hynek too fell into that state of urgency, that the only thing and the one thing that is going to prove the reality of the phenomenon overnight is hardware, a piece of physical evidence. And how Jacques has now come full circle as well, that he never would give us the time of day regarding Roswell, but yet now he has himself, become involved as far as in a, so-called crash retrieval case, with the hope that he's going to finally come up with the Holy Grail.
Well, let's break off there because we're going to have to take a break, obviously. I've got pictures or links to pictures of the debris from this Trinity case on my blog, and I'll put a link to it on the blog for those who would like to take a look at those pictures and my review of the book as well at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. Don and I will be back in just a moment talking more about UFOs and Trinity and what is going on in the world of UFOs today. So please stick around.
Do you enjoy paranormal, sci-fi romance, yet find yourself tired of the same old themes and storylines? Then you won't want to miss Kahira O'Donnell's latest exciting release, To Taste You Again. Alien Lord Kane McKean knew the moment that his destined mate was born. He watched from afar, waiting for her to grow from child to woman. However, before she was old enough, she was stolen from her home world by flesh pirates. Kane searched 10 long years to find her held in a suspension chamber, a 10-year-old girl in a woman's body. He rescued her and swore to give her time to grow up, but with his very life depending upon winning her as a mate, has he waited too long? Get your copy today. To Taste You Again by Kahira O'Donnell is now available on Amazon or KahiraO'Donnell.com.
And we are back talking about UFOs. What else? Don Schmitt is the guest. We were dissecting, I think would be the word, Jacques Vallée's book, Trinity. Don, as I mentioned, and he's mentioned, had an opportunity to chat himself with the main witness, a man who I guess we don't find particularly credible. And a little bit surprised by Jacques Vallée's adherence to this tale. When we look at the overall story, is there any aspect of it that hints about what may have really happened, or is it a complete and total invention by Remy Baca?
Well, as I originally mentioned, what really appalled me was their recounting the behavior of the military. I mean, they're described like the Keystone Cops. I mean, you could just as well have inserted the Three Stooges the way they bumbled through the entire situation, and the total lack of security and having an audience. And I mean, in direct contrast to Roswell, where you would get shooed away, you'd be waved away, you'd be taken aside, and at gunpoint would be told, you didn't see anything, nothing happened here. You're never going to repeat what you just witnessed, that type of thing. Whereas in this case, which you would think would have been a total, as far as red flag to valet. There's nothing military about their response to this. It's like, who were these people? If this did happen as described, I mean, I'm sorry, post World War II, with the beginning of the Cold War, and the idea that they would have a recovery operation of a craft of such, highly advanced technology, and they would treat it as though they were just scraping up the remains of a car accident, and then allowing the boys to just rummage through and remove pieces and behave as though, hey, everyone, is free to come in and grab whatever souvenirs and then hang them from their Christmas trees like so much tinsel thereafter. No.
Well, couldn't an argument be made that they were exposed to something, the military was exposed to something that they were unprepared for, and they wouldn't have recognized the importance of the crash site, and so that the security might have been a little bit lax? Well,
I think if that be the case, security would have been even stricter, would have been even more, enhanced. Even though, as we would joke, even with Roswell, there was nothing in the Army field manual at that time how to respond to that. And that's when, and you would be the expert on that, that's when you pull out all the stops. That's when you don't relax security, you increase them. If you can't identify something, you don't pull back on restrictions, you elevate them.
Well, I think the important point is, and you've alluded to this, but what struck me in the book was that they loaded the object onto a flatbed truck to drive it out of there. They got everything ready to go. They put a tarp over it, and then they all went to lunch.
Yeah.
Took off to town and to lunch. And so the two boys who'd been spying on them for a couple of days ran down there and got underneath the tarp, and one of them climbed up into the craft.
Precisely. They left the truck. They left the craft unattended, unsecured. And then the description that whatever wreckage remained, they discarded. They burned. I'm sorry.
Or buried.
Or buried, right. No.
And I think
from reality.
I think in the book it says that they went back years later, and meaning Valet and Harris went back to the site where it supposedly happened, and the terrain had changed radically because of weathering. I mean, there was some kind of flood, and where they had buried the debris was now under 20 feet of additional ground cover. So they wouldn't be able to locate it anyway. I mean, this is just a good excuse for not being able to provide any evidence, but there we are. Doesn't this hurt the entire UFO community though, when we have this kind of thing come out that's so blatantly untrue?
Well, the book sold well. I mean, it's done well. I mean, you look at the number of reviews at Amazon, and they're all glowing. They're all, they're almost all, accepting of this case. So I guess yes and no. To the unwashed, who again, the novices who just believe everything and anything regarding this subject, I suppose it draws more people into the discussion. But then those of us who look at this historically and look at it as far as scientifically, and just on the very nature of what would have and what should have transpired if the event actually took place. And we're also very familiar with New Mexico, the terrain, the area, in question, and the accessibility. And so we have to put this all together. And it isn't a case of just shaking it up and throwing it on the table and seeing what numbers come up. No, we have to base it on, the time that this allegedly happened. And as a result, we come away with there's absolutely zero evidence. There's nothing to substantiate this. There's no benchmark. There's no press release. There are no military witnesses to substantiate this. So all we can do is, It doesn't even make for a good book.
Well, this kind of reminds me of Philip Corso and The Day After Roswell, which gets a great deal of play. And yet, anybody familiar with military operations understands that his description of the convoy going from Roswell to Wright Field is inaccurate. The description of the military society of the time, where the officer corps was separated from the enlisted corps by, I guess, sociological barriers, not to mention military barriers, that the officers didn't necessarily fraternize with the enlisted guys. I think, and in today's military, a lot of that has changed, but back in 1947, that's the way it was. You just didn't hang around with the enlisted guys. Air crews may have been a little bit different, because I know in my experience in Vietnam, we hung around with the air crews because we were all working together on a mission in a combat environment. But when you're outside that and you're more in a peacetime environment, that there was this great chasm between the officers and the enlisted men. In fact, I knew a girl a long time ago who told me that she had a good friend when her father was in the military, and her good friend's father was in the military, and they would play together until they discovered that her father was an officer and her friend's father was an enlisted man, and she could no longer play with that girl. It gives you an idea of the chasm that separated the enlisted ranks from the officer ranks. But Corso's tale, I think, has been disproven quite a bit. I'm
sure you are as well. We're often asked, well, how come you didn't include Corso in your writing? How come you haven't mentioned Corso in your presentation? And as we both can, very confidently say, it's because we find his story totally unreliable. We know for a fact that he was highly influenced by a known, as far as fabricator, who we exposed, that being Frank Kaufman. We know for a fact that when you read the Corso book The Day After, that the entire summary at the beginning of the book is 100% Frank Kaufman. So here you are, your claim is that you're a first-hand witness and you have to rely on another to provide you with the details, and then no less you rely on a fabricator to provide you with the storyline. So again, it hardly smacks of reality and the truthfulness in the story.
Well, I know that Kaufman and Corso appeared on a radio program together, and every time there was a conflict in the stories, Corso would bend to Kaufman's version of it.
Correct.
Because, well, Corso believed Kaufman was telling the truth. And of course, we know now that Kaufman wasn't telling the truth. We got fooled by Kaufman, who was a nice enough fellow.
We had out to breakfast, always took us out to breakfast.
And would pay for it. And
he would suggest that somebody else was paying for it.
Yes. It was all part of his expense account, so we should allow him to pay for it. Sure, Frank, buy us a couple of eggs and a hunk of toast. I'm on board.
But see, the most telling thing was when I asked, because they had been to Roswell on 2 previous occasions before penning the book, sitting down and actually writing this. And I asked, now, in coming into Roswell, now, where did you stay? Because I was curious as to who were they talking with? Who were they contacting as far as doing their own research? And then to find out that both times they stayed with Frank Kaufman. So how was it that they even, coincidentally came together? And so it was a marriage made in hell, so to speak, in that there was nothing good that would become of this. And we would have warned them, no, Kaufman would be the last one we would recommend you staying with. But nonetheless, there it is. And,
the one other thing I probably should point out, Bing's publishers in the New York area knew who I was, meaning I had submitted books on UFOs and I had published a number of books on UFOs. One of the editors sent me a copy of their proposal for their book, Corso's book. And I was going through that, and I came to the point where Corso claimed to have been a member of MJ-12.
Yes.
And I wrote to I wrote back to the publisher and I said, no,
No.
there is no MJ12. This is a blatant lie.
Right.
And they passed on the book, probably angry at me because the book did very well and made them a lot of money. But the fact of the matter was that it wasn't an honest account of what was going on. We're going to have to take a break here. When we come back, we'll talk about some of the more modern issues in ufology and what's going on and who's doing what and how well they're doing it. And as always, take a look at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And if you have a chance and you're interested in Roswell, take a look at Understanding Roswell. I think there's a lot of information in there. It's going to be a little bit new and a little bit surprising. Other than that, please stick around and I'll be back with Don Schmitt in just a moment.
Do you enjoy paranormal, sci-fi romance, yet find yourself tired of the same old themes and storylines? Then you won't want to miss Kahira O'Donnell's latest exciting release, To Taste You Again. Alien Lord Kane McKean knew the moment that his destined mate was born. He watched from afar, waiting for her to grow from child to woman. However, before she was old enough, she was stolen from her home world by flesh pirates. Kane searched 10 long years to find her held in a suspension chamber, a 10-year-old girl in a woman's body. He rescued her and swore to give her time to grow up, but with his very life depending upon winning her as a mate, has he waited too long? Get your copy today. To Taste You Again by Kahira O'Donnell is now available on Amazon or KahiraO'Donnell.com.
And welcome back to A Different Perspective. I'm still the host, Kevin Randle, believe it or not. I think we've pretty well exhausted Corso and his nonsense and Jacques Vallée and his nonsense. And I noticed that the last books I've done, Understanding Roswell and Level Land, for example, and the book on Socorro are deep in the past. The only book that I've done recently that sort of brings us into the modern world is UFOs in the Deep State. Mm-hmm. And a look at how we got to this point in ufology today, where we are now. What is your take on that sort of thing, where ufology is going? What can we expect in the future?
Well, you certainly remember one of the ways we even originally met was with your book that came out, the October scenario, with the very idea that wave in the fall of 1973 was the arrival, the first time that we had actually been visited. And I would turn it the other way around, that the last true wave, the last true confrontation or visitation was that fall of 73. That whatever the phenomenon, whatever its origins, in many ways, it went home. You know, they finished up whatever their purpose, whatever their agenda here. And we haven't had any true, waves since 1973. And so the question, and I think you would fall in the same camp, that whenever I hear of a sighting today, you go, got to be ours. I mean, the way, just as far as the drone technology alone almost would put the possibility of a legitimate UFO sighting in maybe now 1% of all sightings. Before it was 5%. Now it's down to maybe 1%. So it comes down to, is the phenomenon itself that relevant any longer, juxtaposed to, well, now if there are still secluded answers, if there's any disclosure forthcoming, that's where we need to start focusing. That's what we need to start championing, that cause, the idea that if we can't have congressional hearings on this subject, then there's nothing new forthcoming. And
Well, you said something. You said something interesting. I want to explore here. I've been looking at the sightings, the triangular sightings of triangles, and the number of sightings of triangles is exploded over the last few years.
correct.
And I just put up on the blog a brief discussion in a topic called updates, and I look at some triangles. But there's a picture that was taken in, I forget exactly where now, Missouri. Anyhow, Kansas. I'm sorry, Kansas, Wichita, Kansas. Just came to me, of a triangular shaped object. I mean, it's a great picture. It's got a contrail, but the idea is it's one of ours.
It has a contrail. It has a contrail.
Yes, and it's a great photograph. I mean, the objects are high in the sky, and the guy managed to get a picture of it. And a couple of weeks before, guys near Amarillo, Texas, I always want to call it Armadillo, Texas. Amarillo, Texas,
right.
had also seen a triangular shaped object like that. And then I put up a picture of a triangular shaped balloon on that, suggesting that an awful lot of the sightings of triangles in today's environment are of our technology.
Exactly.
The advancements in our technology. The one thing that Dave Mahler told me last a couple of weeks ago when I chatted with him on the program was the earlier triangle sightings. He noted that they were flying blunt side forward.
Correct.
Which is not aerodynamic. And the modern sightings, now it's the apex forward. And that seemed to be a point where we could discriminate between a terrestrially based object and maybe something that wasn't terrestrially based. But it's just that kind of thing. Our technology is moving to the point where it is not like anything we're used to of an airplane with the wings and the tail and all of that stuff. We're moving into the flying wing phenomenon, the B-2 bomber, for example, and now we've got the triangular shaped object. And I have no clue as to what these guys photographed. I believe it's terrestrially based. But the photograph, there's no ground detail or anything like that in it. It's just the object in the sky, high in the sky with the contrail following it. It's clearly something that's terrestrially based.
And you know that I think it was everyone's impression the first time they saw the F-117, the stealth fighter, just a silhouette from looking straight on from the front. It was something right out of Star Wars. And the idea that there's nothing aerodynamic about that aircraft, that if not for all the onboard computers that are constantly adjusting its attitude, its altitude, and everything else, it would drop like a rock. It's one of the reasons they have crashed as often as they have, for nothing more than a computer malfunction. And so we've reached a point that unless there is an actual, I would almost have to wonder, it would have to truly be something beyond our comprehension, almost to the point, as Arthur C. Clarke would suggest, that it would almost appear magical, that we should almost expect that some technology from another planet, another world, would be like magic, that it would leave you awestruck, that there would just be nothing that could, define that observation. We've already reached a point that, my God, that window is getting smaller and smaller, that we're reaching a point that we too, just imagine if the Apollo program, the space program, would have continued unabated. We grew up with, the Kennedy, space program, that we were going to set foot on the moon by 1970. And the plan was we were going to do the same on Mars by 1980, by the mid 80s, that type of thing. And so I don't want to get into the secret space program, because I don't believe that. I don't fall into that,
Well, let me point out there was a secret space program, and we discussed UFOs in the deep state, and it was canceled. They were training the astronauts at Vandenberg Air Force Base, and but it's not the secret space program that we hear in the UFO community, where we've got the.
That's what I meant to say.
We're sending people to planets in other solar systems.
We're already occupying. We already have a base on the dark side of the moon, and we're already colonizing Mars and that type of thing. Of course.
Well, I think that when we look at ufology today, as it really isn't advancing at all. We're doing the same things we always did. We cannot seem to get a grasp on it. I know Rich Reynolds at one point said that we geezers, you and I and the other people, should get out of the way and let the youngsters take over. But they don't seem to have the capability to do the investigations, nor do they have the desire to do them.
No, they don't, and they don't have the historic background. They don't have the knowledge. They don't have had the minefield to walk through as far as to get where we are. I mean, the young people need to give us credit that we are where we are, because you have the old geezers that have essentially jousted with the powers that be for all this time. I think I myself have found that I often look back and I think when there was this mutual, and I won't use the word enemy, but at least it was the opposition, especially through the years of Blue Book, that you actually had someone to challenge, someone to debate with on the issue, on the subject. And it was like, who was going to get to the finish line first? And I personally feel that you had mentioned that you had the grand opportunity of actually meeting Donald Keyhoe. And I often think that the reason that they spoon-fed Keyhoe, the reason that Keyhoe had the relationship he had with the Pentagon, was because they had to keep him on a short leash. They needed to keep him at arm's length. And they did that by providing him mundane cases, albeit they were military, but they didn't suggest occupants. They didn't suggest crashes or anything of a piloted, of an occupied nature. And as a result, Keyhoe, he wrote the wonderful books that he did of these great military cases, but they weren't the most profound. They weren't the best cases that they had at that time. And
well, the other thing we can say is the really great cases didn't show up in Blue Book either. I mean, how many cases of occupants are in Blue Book that they didn't say, well, it's a psychological problem? There's Zamora, there's one or two others where they said, it's an unidentified case with an occupant's involved. But for the most part, if you saw an occupant, you were immediately labeled as psychological, and they blew the whole thing off. They didn't bother to investigate it, or they did it surreptitiously. And I think of Kelly Hopkinsville at that point, where some guy from was it Campbell Air Force Base investigated for him and sent him information. And so they could say, well, we didn't really investigate this, but they had the information.
They had the information. And, and Hynek as well as the chief scientific consultant to Blue Book often commented that he was fully aware that the hardcore, as he would put it, cases were going upstairs, were not going to Blue Book. They were going directly to the Pentagon. And so we've always had to deal with the mundane in that regard. So I guess it would come back to, and it was the reason that Keyhoe himself didn't believe that these were even manned craft, because there was nothing that the Air Force was providing him even suggested that. And
well,
so,
we're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid, because we just bumping up against the time limit here. Your latest book is an updated version of Witness to Roswell, the
75th anniversary edition. So as the editor came to us and asked if we would provide new material, which we did, we wrote new chapters,
and that was what happened to me. And the publisher came to me and says, "Can you do an updated version?" So we came up with Understanding Roswell and looked at the whole cases in a more dispassionate way. Once again, I want to thank Don for taking time out to spend an hour with us today, talking about UFOs and where everything is going. The blog, once again, is www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. The latest book is Understanding Roswell. And take a look at the Level Land case. And if you liked it, put in a rating, because it does help us a little bit. I will be back in 167 hours with a new guest and a new program. So thank you for stopping by.